When I stand before you tonight, I do not speak as a distant theorist, but as one who has walked in the chambers of the human psyche, who has listened to the tremors that move within the unconscious, who has seen the fire hidden beneath the polite mask of the empath. You know this fire, though you have been taught to smother it. It is your anger, but I tell you now, it is sacred. It is not the vulgar fury that destroys, not the shallow resentment that festers in the shadow of envy. No, this anger is the voice of the self, when your soul has been betrayed by your own endless pleasing. It is a holy eruption that declares, enough, many of you have lived your lives in servitude to the other. You have shaped yourselves into mirrors, into pliant masks, into endless givers of what is asked and never receivers of what is needed. And at first, it appears noble, even Christ-like, to bend so completely to dissolving to compassion. But beneath this glow of goodness, there festers a wound. The empath who pleases endlessly is not alive but divided. You seek love through sacrifice, but what is often hidden in this gesture is fear, the terror of abandonment, the dread of being invisible, the old memory of the child who was loved only when quiet, compliant, useful. Thus you have learned to confuse pleasing with presence, and so your soul has become a ghost in your own life. But hear me, there is a moment when the unconscious will not allow this masquerade to continue. It sends a tremor, a red thread of emotion, a rising storm. It sends you anger, you recoil, for you have been taught since childhood that anger is sin, that it is dangerous, that it must be buried under smiles and apologies. Yet the psyche is wiser than your conditioning. It knows that the path to wholeness does not lie in endless suppression, but in the integration of the opposites. If you deny your anger, you deny your vitality. If you banish your rage, you exile your soul. For anger, when sacred, is the guardian at the threshold of your true self. Think of the archetype of the warrior. The warrior does not rage blindly. He wields the sword with clarity, defending what must be defended, saying no when the world demands yes. The warrior is present because he knows himself. For the empath who has drowned in pleasing, anger is the birth of this warrior archetype. It is not cruelty that emerges, but presence, a sudden solidity of being. When you allow yourself to feel the holy fire, you cease to disappear into the needs of others. You no longer confuse servitude with love. You step into the raw ground of authenticity. But this path is not simple. The unconscious does not give its gifts without cost. To welcome anger is to encounter your shadow, and the shadow is not an enemy, but a teacher. It holds all that you have disowned, your selfishness, your demands, your cries, your rage. And so, when you finally face it, the first impression is terror. You will see yourself not as the angel of mercy you imagined, but as a creature of raw desire, capable of saying no, capable of being hated, capable of breaking the chains of expectation. This is why so many empaths remain trapped. They cannot bear the guilt of being seen as selfish, unkind, or, God forbid, angry. But individuation, the journey toward the wholeness of the self, requires precisely this confrontation. You cannot step into your full being by clinging to one-sided virtue. You must embrace your shadow and recognize the sacredness of what has been cast away. Let me tell you of a dream. A woman once came to me who had lived her life in the silent service of her family. She cooked, cleaned, sacrificed, smiled through her exhaustion, never raised her voice. One night, she dreamed she was walking through a cathedral, and at the altar stood a statue of Christ. But the statue was broken, and inside its chest was a red dragon, breathing smoke and fire. She woke in terror, but I told her, this dream is not a curse, but a revelation. The Christ she worshipped was the mask of endless sacrifice, the broken statue of pleasing. Inside him lived the dragon, the sacred anger that had been entombed in stone. Her psyche was demanding resurrection. The dragon was not her enemy, but her power. And I tell you the same. Within your broken idol of selflessness, the dragon waits, and the dragon is your presence. Do not misunderstand me. I do not call you to explode, to unleash destruction upon the world. Anger, when unconscious, is indeed a poison, but anger, when integrated, becomes fuel for authenticity. It sharpens your boundaries. It teaches you where you end and the other begins. It teaches you to say no without shame, to say yes without fear, to love not from compulsion but from freedom. The sacred task is not to banish anger, but to transform it into presence, and presence is nothing less than the living image of the self. You must learn to sit with the fire without burning yourself. When the anger rises, do not suppress it with false smiles, but neither surrender it to violence. Sit with it as one sits before a sacred flame. Ask it, what are you here to protect? What boundary has been crossed? What truth in me has been silenced? And then listen. You will hear the voice of the child within, the forgotten one who cried, but was told to hush, who wanted, but was shamed for desiring, who burned with passion, but was told it was too much. That child has been waiting in your shadow for decades, waiting for you to turn toward them with fierce love. Your anger is the voice of that child, crying out, I exist. And when you honor that cry, something remarkable happens. The false self begins to crack. The persona, the mask of politeness, of endless pleasing crumbles. Beneath it, you discover the raw ground of presence. You no longer enter the room as a ghost of service, bending to every unspoken demand. You enter as yourself, rooted, aware, alive. And paradoxically, it is in this presence that true compassion is born. For compassion without boundaries is not love but self-destruction. Real compassion flows only from the one who is whole, who has reconciled shadow and light, who can give without losing themselves. The empath's anger then is not an obstacle to love, but its very foundation. Without it, you are an echo. With it, you are a flame. Now, let us move deeper. In myth, sacred anger is often personified by the gods who refuse injustice. Think of Kali, the dark goddess, whose rage is not hatred, but fierce protection. She dances with fire, cutting away falsehoods, demanding authenticity, or think of Christ overturning the tables in the temple, his whip in hand, his face burning with holy fury. Was this sin? No. It was truth. It was a soul defending what must not be desecrated. When you feel your anger, you are not falling from grace. You are entering the temple of your own self, where the tables of false pleasing must be overturned. And your whip is the boundary that says, I am here. I am sacred. I will not vanish into your demands. The world fears this presence. People prefer the empath who pleases, who never resists, who soothes every wound, but never speaks their own. Your family, your lovers, your friends, they may recoil when you begin to stand in your anger. They will call you selfish, dramatic, cruel, but understand, they are not describing you, but mourning the loss of their control. For years, they fed on your self-erasure. They built their comfort upon your silence. When you begin to burn with presence, they are forced to meet their own shadow, their own demands, their own selfishness. And so they lash out. Do not let their projections drive you back into exile. Stand firm. This is the initiation of the warrior within, and though you may feel alone, know that this path leads to the deepest communion with yourself, with life, with the divine archetype of wholeness. Listen closely. To integrate your anger is not merely a psychological adjustment, it is a spiritual act. For in the depths of the unconscious, anger is the fire of transformation. Alchemists called it the rubedo, the reddening, the sacred heat that completes the work of turning lead into gold. Your pleasing has been the lead, the heavy, dull substance of repression. Your anger is the fire that melts it, revealing the gold of presence. But you must stay in the fire long enough. If you flee, if you return to pleasing too soon, the alchemy is left unfinished. This is why your work is to endure, to sit in the discomfort, to let the fire burn away the lies, to trust that what emerges will be your true self. I want you to feel this in your body now. Recall a moment when you said yes, though every fiber of your being cried no. Feel the tightness in your chest, the collapse in your stomach, the dull ache in your soul. Now recall a moment when you dare to say no, even trembling, even ashamed. Feel the sudden clarity, the breath returning, the ground beneath your feet. That is the difference between pleasing and presence. That is the difference between self-betrayal and sacred anger. Your body knows, your soul knows, it is time your mind listens. And so I ask you, will you continue to crucify yourself upon the altar of pleasing, or will you allow the sacred fire of your anger to resurrect you into presence? The choice is not abstract. It is lived each day in the smallest gestures. The no you speak when others expect yes, the truth you admit when silence would be safer, the boundary you set, though it costs you approval. Each act is an initiation, each choice a step toward wholeness. Do not expect comfort on this path, expect fire, but know also that this fire will not consume you, it will transfigure you. The empath who has silenced anger lives in half-light, moving like a dreamer who knows not if he belongs to the world of day or the kingdom of night. Yet the psyche, in its relentless push toward wholeness, will not tolerate halfness forever. Anger is the knock at the door of consciousness, the shadow insisting, you must open, you must let me in. If you refuse, if you smother it with ever more pleasing, it will turn against you. It will twist inward, becoming depression, fatigue, illness, a loss of vitality. What was meant to be a flame, guiding you into presence, becomes a smoke that suffocates. So often, the empath complains of exhaustion, of mysterious ailments, of an inner numbness. But beneath these symptoms lies the denied fire. Your soul is not tired because it gives too much. It is tired because it denies itself. Anger is the signal flare rising from that inner battlefield, calling you home. When I speak of anger as sacred, some recoil, imagining violence, cruelty, the grotesque eruptions of hatred. But these are not what I mean. What you have seen in the world, the wars, the abuse, the wrath of the ego, drunk on its own wounded pride, that is anger possessed by shadow, anger unconsciously acted out. Sacred anger is different. It is anger brought into awareness, held within the vessel of consciousness, purified by reflection. It becomes not destruction but clarity. It cuts through illusions. It shows you where you have been complicit in your own erasure. It reveals where your yes was false, where your no was stolen. It is the God within who refuses to remain crucified. Consider again the archetypes. The empath who denies anger is caught in the archetype of the martyr, bleeding endlessly, sacrificing without end, carrying the sins of others, while never daring to speak of their own. The martyr archetype has its place, but when lived unconsciously, it becomes pathology. It leads not to redemption, but to emptiness. Sacred anger calls forth another archetype, the sovereign. The sovereign is not violent, but firm, not cruel, but centered. The sovereign knows their own territory and rules it with integrity. When the empath feels their anger and claims their boundaries, they shift from martyrdom into sovereignty. They cease to live as victims of circumstance and begin to govern their own psychic kingdom. I recall again a dream, a man who was soft-spoken, endlessly yielding, who never voiced his needs. Once dreamed, he stood in a forest where a wolf followed him. At first he ran, terrified, but the wolf chased relentlessly. At last, he turned, and to his astonishment, the wolf bowed before him. He woke weeping. He realized the wolf was his anger. So long as he fled, it haunted him. When he turned to face it, it became his ally. This is the transformation. Your wolf, your dragon, your fire. It is not there to devour you, but to protect you. But only if you stop running. You must also see the cultural spell that binds you. Society often rewards pleasing, especially in those born with sensitive souls. The child who serves becomes the good child. The woman who bends becomes virtuous. The man who swallows his truth becomes strong. And so the empath is conditioned into believing that compliance is love, silence is peace, repression is holiness. But these are lies of the collective shadow. They keep you manageable, docile, useful, true love, true peace, true holiness. They are born only when the individual stands in their wholeness. To please endlessly is not to love, but to manipulate, for you give not from fullness, but from fear, hoping to secure approval, to avoid abandonment. Sacred anger exposes this falsehood. It tears the veil from your goodness and shows the wounded bargain beneath. And in that revelation, you are set free. Yet freedom is never without cost. When you begin to live your anger as sacred, relationships will shift. Those who depended on your silence will resist. They will accuse you, shame you, withdraw. You must be prepared for the loneliness that comes with authenticity. But understand, this loneliness is not the void of abandonment, but the spaciousness of rebirth. When you no longer crowd your life with false bonds, you make room for true connections. Presence attracts presence. Those who can meet you in your wholeness will come, but only once you have chosen to be whole. Until then, you will remain surrounded by those who feed on your self-erasure. Do not fear their departure. Let them go. Your anger is the fire that clears the field for new life. The mystic spoke of purgation, of a fire that cleanses the soul before it enters union. This fire is not in some distant afterlife, but within you now. Your anger is that purgation. It burns away the dross of false identity, of compulsive pleasing, of shadow denied. When you allow it, you feel stripped, naked, vulnerable. You do not know who you are without the mask of endless service, but this very unknowing is the doorway to individuation. Only when the old persona collapses can the self emerge. To embrace sacred anger is to step into the mystery of becoming, to risk death of the false for birth of the true. Do not imagine this journey as linear. The psyche moves in waves, in spirals. At times you will feel strong, clear, so verein, able to wield your anger with grace. At other times you will fall back into pleasing, ashamed of your fire, afraid of rejection, do not despair. The work of individuation is not perfection, but persistence. Each time you return to your anger, each time you honor it. Instead of burying it, you deepen your presence. Slowly, the pattern shifts, the fire becomes less frightening, more familiar. It becomes not a storm, but a hearth, warming your life with clarity and authenticity. And here, perhaps, we must linger on the paradox that anger, which so many believe to be the destroyer of love, is in truth its guardian. For love without boundaries is not love at all, but dissolution. The empath's task is not to abandon love, but to sanctify it through presence. When you allow anger to inform you, your love ceases to be compulsion. You no longer give to avoid rejection. You give because you are full. You no longer merge to escape loneliness. You merge because you choose. Love becomes free, not bound. And this is the greatest gift you can offer another human soul, not the ghost of pleasing, but the flame of presence. Imagine standing before someone you love and saying no, not with hatred, not with resentment, but with calm clarity. Imagine the shock in their eyes, the shattering of the old pattern. In that moment, though painful, a new possibility is born. The relationship may end or it may transform, but in either case, truth has entered, and truth is the only soil where real intimacy can grow. Sacred anger, then, is not the enemy of love, but its midwife. It births a love that is fierce, real, unbreakable. As we walk deeper into this territory, the archetype of the alchemist returns. The work of turning lead into gold was never about metals, but about the soul. The lead is your repression, your pleasing, your false self. The gold is your presence, yourself, your wholeness. The fire that transforms one into the other is anger. But alchemy requiert patience, discipline, reverence. If you let the fire burn uncontrolled, you destroy the vessel. If you extinguish it, you remain in lead. But if you hold it, contain it, let it heat slowly, the transformation occurs. This is the art of inner work, to be both the vessel and the alchemist, to let your anger burn without consuming, to let it purify without destroying. This is how the empath becomes whole. I tell you again, your anger is sacred, not because it grants permission to harm, but because it is the doorway to authenticity, not because it elevates you above others, but because it grounds you in your own soul, not because it frees you from suffering, but because it gives your suffering meaning. It is the divine within saying, I will not vanish. I will not please. At the cost of my essence, I will burn until I am seen. And so the question remains, will you dare to honor your fire? Will you step out of the martyr's tomb and into the sovereign's throne? Will you risk the loss of false peace for the gain of true presence? This is not an intellectual inquiry. It is a lived initiation. Each time you feel the fire rise, you stand at the threshold. You may suppress, you may explode, or you may hold it sacred. The choice is yours. But know that the soul will not rest until the fire has been integrated. For the empath's anger is not the end of love, but the beginning of presence. The fire of anger is not only personal, but archetypal. It belongs not only to your private biography, but to the collective unconscious, where gods and demons dwell. When you feel this anger rising, it is not merely your voice, but the voice of countless ancestors who swallowed their truth, who bent beneath the weight of oppressive systems, who bore chains of silence. The empath is often the carrier of ancestral wounds, chosen unconsciously to embody the suffering of those who could not speak. Your pleasing is not just your own strategy, it is the inheritance of a lineage. And when you awaken to sacred anger, you are not only healing yourself, you are breaking a chain that has bound your bloodline. You are saying, with the authority of the self, this silence ends with me. Dreams reveal this truth. A woman dreams of standing in a house where generations of women cooked, cleaned, and bowed their heads. In the dream, she is handed a knife and she trembles with terror. She cannot imagine using it, yet the dream insists the knife is not for violence, but for cutting through the web of servitude. It is the symbol of anger transformed into discernment. The psyche, through dream, offers her the archetypal weapon of liberation. And so it is with you. Your anger is not madness, but the knife of clarity. It cuts through illusions, savors false loyalties, frees you from ancestral burdens. When we speak of archetypes, we must remember they are not abstract theories, but living realities. The archetype of the empath is bound to the archetype of the wounded child. The wounded child learns to please as a survival strategy, believing that love is conditional, that safety requires obedience, but beneath this strategy lives another archetype. The rebel, the outlaw, the trickster. The rebel is your anger, long buried, waiting to rise. If you never allow it, you remain forever the child, forever dependent on approval. If you honor it, you grow into the adult, the sovereign, the whole being. To integrate anger is to cross the threshold from wounded child into mature self. It is the very essence of individuation. You must also understand that the unconscious communicates in symbols, not doctrines. When you repress anger, it returns disguised in dreams of fire, floods, beasts, intruders. These are not random images, but the psyche's attempt to bring what is unconscious into awareness. A man once told me of recurring dreams where his house caught fire. He tried endlessly to put it out, running with buckets of water, screaming for help. He woke each time in panic, yet the house was not literal. It was his psyche, his life smoldering with the anger he refused to acknowledge. The fire would not cease until he allowed himself to feel. When at last he admitted his rage, toward his father, the dreams shifted. The fire did not disappear, but transformed into a hearth, a steady flame. The unconscious had done its work. His anger, insoutenue, became the warmth of presence. This is the alchemical process. Nigredo, the blackening of despair. Albedo, the whitening of purification. Rubedo, the reddening of transformation. Anger belongs to rubedo, the sacred redness of life. Without it, the alchemy fails. The empath who represses anger remains in the nigredo, stuck in the black swamp of depression, endlessly drowning in others' needs. To move forward, you must pass through the fire. Only then can you rise into the gold of presence. This is why I call your anger sacred. It is the necessary element in the great work of individuation. Consider also the collective shadow of our time. Entire cultures worship false peace, demanding silence in the name of civility. Societies built on exploitation praise those who never resist. The empath becomes the ideal citizen, obedient, compliant, endlessly serving the machinery of others' desires. But beneath this facade, the collective unconscious rumbles. Anger erupts in protests, revolutions, movements. These are not accidents, but eruptions of the repressed archetype of justice. And so it is within you. Your personal anger resonates with the collective. To honor it is not selfish but sacred, for you participate in the healing of the greater whole. I must speak also of projection. When you repress your anger, you project it outward. You see rage in others, fear it, condemn it, or you attract those who act it out for you: abusive partners, controlling friends, aggressive bosses. They embody what you have disowned. The empath often wonders, why do I always meet such people? The answer is shadow. Until you integrate your own anger, you will draw to you those who mirror it unconsciously. This is the psyche's way of forcing you to face what you deny. Once you claim your anger, the projections dissolve. You no longer need the outer persecutor, because you have befriended the inner wolf. And in this transformation, your relationships shift dramatically. You cease to be the victim and become the participant in your own destiny. Let me tell you, integration does not mean indulgence. To integrate anger is not to indulge in rage, to lash out, to dominate. That is the ego intoxicated with shadow. Integration means relationship. You enter into dialogue with your anger. As one would with a sacred figure, you ask it what it wants, what it protects, what it reveals. You listen, you honor, you learn. Over time, anger becomes not a master, but a messenger. It comes, delivers its truth, and departs, leaving you clearer, more grounded. Those who integrate anger do not erupt constantly. They radiate steadiness, for the fire burns within as presence. Others feel it as authority, as authenticity. They know Here's a person who cannot be manipulated, who will not disappear. Here is a soul who is fully alive. The mystical traditions have always known this. In Taoist philosophy, fire is one of the 5 elements necessary for harmony. In Kabbalah, the Gevurah severity. Discipline is as sacred as chesed, mercy, compassion. In Christianity, the wrath of God is not cruelty but justice, the fierce love that will not allow desecration. In Hinduism, Shiva's fiery dance destroys not to annihilate but to renew. Sacred anger is everywhere in myth, reminding us that without fire there is no balance. The empath who pleases endlessly clings to chesed without gevurah, to mercy without severity, to love without boundaries. This imbalance is not holiness but neurosis. To restore harmony, you must embrace both. Your anger is your gevurah, your Shiva, your sacred fire. Without it, your compassion is a lie. Now, I turn to you directly. Feel in your body where your anger lives. For some, it is in the chest, a burning. For others, the stomach, a knot. For others, the throat, a choking silence. Place your awareness there. Do not push it away. Breathe into it. This is the altar of your fire. This is where the self waits. Do not rush to act, to shout, to prove. First, feel. Let the fire speak. It may tell you of betrayals you never named, of boundaries crossed, of desire denied. It may weep, it may roar, it may whisper. Listen, this is not pathology. This is initiation. Every time you honor this fire, you draw closer to the center of your being. And when the time comes to act, act not from compulsion but from clarity. A sacred no spoken calmly is more powerful than 1,000 shouted yeses. A boundary drawn with presence transforms the air. Others may rage, but they feel the immovable ground beneath your words. This is the power of sacred anger. It roots you. You become unshakable, not rigid, not violent, but unshakable. Like a mountain with fire in its core, you stand. The empath's task is to transform pleasing into presence. Pleasing is absence. It erases the self to secure love. Presence is fullness. It reveals the self as love. Anger is the bridge between them. Without it, you remain a shadow of yourself, endlessly chasing approval. With it, you step into the radiant paradox of individuation. To be fully yourself is the only way to truly love another. The dragon in your chest, the wolf in your dream, the fire in your belly, these are not curses. They are your sacred guardians. They wait for you to stop running. They wait for you to turn and bow, to say, I hear you, I need you, I honor you. And then they will bow to you in return. So I ask you again, as I will ask until the end, will you choose the false peace of pleasing or the sacred fire of presence? Will you continue to exile your anger, or will you welcome it home as the long-lost king of your inner kingdom? Do not delay. Life is short, the self is urgent, and the world does not need more ghosts. It needs flames. It needs souls who can stand in presence, who can love fiercely because they are whole, who can say no with as much holiness as they say yes. The empath's anger is not a flaw to be cured, but a sacrament to be lived. To embrace it is to enter the temple of your own soul, where pleasing dies and presence is born. There comes a moment when the empath who has lived a life of pleasing feels a trembling in the soul, as if the walls of the persona can no longer contain the raw vitality of what is within. This trembling is your anger. And when you no longer treat it as an intruder, but as a sacred guest, a transformation occurs that is nothing short of miraculous. It is as if the psyche itself takes a breath for the first time. You realize that you are not simply here to reflect others, to bend and disappear, but to stand, to burn, to exist as presence. This realization is terrifying, for it means the death of who you thought you were. Yet it is also liberating, for it is the birth of who you truly are. I want you to imagine standing in the middle of your life, surrounded by those who have always known you as the pleaser. They expect your yes, your smile, your endless capacity to hold their pain. And then something shifts. You feel the fire in your chest, the wolf at your side, the dragon breathing within. You speak, perhaps softly, but with a clarity that cuts through the air. No, I cannot. I will not this time. And in that instant, the atmosphere changes. Some recoil, some rage, some collapse, but beneath their reactions, something in the universe itself resounds. Finally, at last, the soul has spoken. At last, presence has arrived. This is what I mean when I call your anger sacred. It is not simply an emotion, but a ritual, a rite of passage, an initiation into authenticity. Every no you speak from presence is a sacred act. Every boundary you draw is a prayer. Every time you refuse to betray yourself, the self rejoices, the unconscious sings. The archetypes align, for you have stepped into the eternal drama of individuation, the unfolding of the soul into wholeness. And wholeness is not gentle compliance, but fierce integration. It is the union of opposites, love and anger, mercy and severity, light and shadow. Without anger, your love is incomplete. Without shadow, your light is false. Only together do they form the living mandala of the self. You may ask, what happens when I live from this sacred anger? What becomes of my life, my relationships, my place in the world? I tell you, much will fall away. Some friends will leave. Lovers will depart. Family may turn against you. But these losses are not destruction, but pruning. The false must die for the true to live. In time, those who can meet your presence will appear. They may be few, but they will be real. They will not want your pleasing, but your truth. They will not feed on your silence, but rejoice in your fire. and in their presence you will taste intimacy for the first time, not the fusion of fear, but the communion of wholeness, and the world itself will respond. For though society fears those who burn with presence, it also secretly longs for them. The collective is starving for souls who will not vanish, who will not submit to the machinery of conformity, who will speak the truth, even when costly. When you live your anger as sacred, you become a beacon. Others feel it in your words, your silence, your gaze. They sense that here's a person who cannot be bought, cannot be silenced, cannot be reduced. And though they may resist, they are also drawn, for something in them longs to awaken too. Your fire becomes contagious, igniting others to find their own. This is how transformation spreads, not through preaching, but through presence. In myth, the hero must always face the dragon. The dragon is the archetype of fear, rage, shout. At first it seems the enemy, the monstrous beast to be slain. But the deeper wisdom is that the dragon guards the treasure. Only by confronting it can the hero claim what is theirs. The empath's dragon is anger. For years you have fled it, condemned it, locked it away. But the treasure of presence lies behind it. When you face it, when you bow to it, when you allow it to breathe through you, the treasure is revealed, your soul, radiant, unshakable, alive. And then you understand that the dragon was never your enemy but your guardian. So do not run from your anger. Do not drown it in silence. Do not project it onto others. Turn and face it. Feel its heat. Listen to its roar, and then step closer. Ask it what it wants, what it needs, what it protects. You will find that beneath its fire is a tender heart, the wounded child who only ever wanted to be seen, the sacred self who only ever wanted to be whole. And when you embrace this, the dragon softens. Its fire does not vanish, but transforms. It becomes not a blaze of destruction, but a steady flame, the hearth of presence. And from this hearth you live. I tell you again, pleasing is death. Presence is life. Your anger is the bridge between them. To walk this bridge is not easy. It will cost you illusions, relationships, comfort, but it will give you your soul. And what greater gift could there be? For in the end, when all else falls away, it is only your soul that matters. And your soul longs not for endless pleasing, but for wholeness, for authenticity, for presence. Therefore, I call you to honor your anger as sacred. When it rises, do not curse it, but bless it. Do not fear it, but welcome it. Do not suppress it, but listen. Let it guide you, teach you, transform you, and then live it not as rage, not as cruelty, but as presence. Speak your no, claim your space, burn with clarity, and in doing so, you will not only save yourself, but offer the world the gift it needs most. A soul fully alive. The empath's anger is sacred because it is the voice of the self demanding to be born. To ignore it is to betray your destiny. To embrace it is to fulfill it. And when you do, you will know a joy deeper than pleasing, a love fiercer than compliance, a peace truer than silence. You will know presence, and presence is the gold of the alchemist, the treasure of the hero, the promise of the self. So I leave you with this. The next time the fire rises in your chest, do not flee, stand, feel, breathe, and whisper to yourself, this anger is sacred. This anger is my guide. This anger is the doorway to my presence. And then step through. The self awaits.